Okay, so welcome everybody. It's time to start. Again, I hope everybody can hear me. If you have any problems, there should be a small little chat window on your left, so you can always give us feedback there. We work without a separate moderation today, so I would kindly ask you, if you have any questions, please enter them in the chat window, and we will have a Q&A session at the end. So I will go through all the questions again, and we'll try to answer them accordingly. I hope, again, everybody can understand me clearly. If you have any problems with the audio, it might have to call in the number in the chat window as well. Okay, perfect. Then I would suggest to start. Let me share my screen so we can see what I can. Okay, that should actually work. Okay. So yeah, today we want to have a look at the Camunda Tasklist and the Forms SDK. So that's basically a pretty specific topic from the hands-on webinars. It's the first hands-on webinar we have. We have 4. I will reference them during this webinar as well again. Maybe give you a short introduction who I am. My name is Bernd Rücker. I'm one of the 2 founders of Camunda. I basically have a technical background, so I'm working for over 10 years with Java enterprise technology and basically with workflow engines from the beginning. So I basically worked with a couple of different basically open source engines over the time, so I gained a lot of experience with that. My role at Camunda at the moment is basically being kind of evangelist, so basically touring all over the world to present Camunda BPM to the people, and I'm still doing consultancy in customer projects, so I'm doing a lot of proof of concepts, which is basically important to me to understand what really happens out there at the customers in the projects, how that works, and what works and what doesn't work. Yeah, I've written a couple of books. Maybe the most important or most interesting one for you is the Real Life BPMN book, which is available in German, English, and Spanish, where we get a lot of good feedback. If you want to reach out to me, if you have any questions later on, just send me an email, or you can find me on Twitter as well. Yeah, basically that's me. And today we want to have a look at the task list. So I want to give a short introduction of about human task management in BPMN in general and in Camunda BPM in specific. I want to give an introduction to the task list. So we built a completely new task list in the 7.2 release. So I want to give you some insights on the technology and the features, basically on the why we developed a new one, and yeah, maybe a couple of roadmap things as well. The biggest part of this webinar should be a demo. So I really want to dive into concrete, yeah, basically example. I want to show you all the features live using the task list. And I have a couple of more details on the task list, which make more sense after the demo. And we will have obviously a summary at the end, and then we will have enough time for questions and answers. So yeah, keep your questions ready or post them already in the chat if you like. Okay, the example I've chosen for a process specification request. Actually, I don't like that example too much because it's a very simple process normally, and it's very often used as an example for BPMN and processes. And that's actually not what BPM is about. If you look at our customers, what they're doing with the platform is really core processes. So, for example, we have Zalando as an customer. They are processing each and every order over the Camunda BPM platform. So they are really a huge amount of orders every day they're handling over the platform. Or we have insurance companies doing claim handling or client onboarding, or we have banks and telecommunication companies and all these kind of things. So they're really core processes they're executing. So vacation request is kind of a pet example, but it's actually pretty handy for this webinar because it's a small, easy process, and it has enough things in it to show you a couple of the features of the Camunda task list. So bear with me that I've chosen that very easy example. That's the BPMN process. I don't want to explain BPMN from scratch, so I guess you will recognize that. So somebody wants to go on vacation. He starts a process. The first thing, we have a so-called user task in our process for the boss or the employee to approve that vacation. If he approves that, it goes to the human resources because somebody has to book basically the days you take on vacation on your leave account. And then we send an email to all colleagues that you go on vacation. If the vacation is not approved, we send an email to you that you don't get the vacation. Okay, very easy process, simplified for that matter. But it's basically what I wanted to have is a couple of user tasks and a decision in the process flow. Okay, I think that's hopefully to follow. Human task management is now about the user task. So in BPMN, this is called the user task. That basically means a real human, somebody should do that. So the process engine steers the process. So when you request vacation, a process instance is started and it's controlled by the engine. But the approval is done by you. The engine creates a task to do on the task list. You might call that to-do list or inbox, or there are a couple of different names for that. But it basically means you have a point where, as a human, where you can see what tasks you have to do. What often is done additionally is like you're sending an email to the people as a notification. Okay, here is some task waiting, and we will see that later on how we can easily do that with Camunda BPM as well. So we have to-do lists for basically different roles. And that's a second big thing about task lists, which is pretty important or pretty interesting to have a look at, is to filter the task list accordingly. So for example, the boss only wants to see the to-dos he has to do. And the human resources obviously want only to see their user tasks. I will show you that later on. Okay, so that's task management. If you look at it from the Camunda BPM implementation perspective, what we basically do is we separated the task management as basically a small component within the engine from the BPMN execution. So as every time you have a user task, when the process engine, when the process instance enters the user task, we create a task in the task management. As soon as the task gets completed by the user, it basically triggers the process instance to move on in the process flow. The important thing is that that's basically separated. So what you can do in the engine easily is you can create your own tasks which are not tied to a BPMN process. We will see that later on. So you can have tasks different from case management, from CMMS, or maybe even ad hoc if you just create tasks via the API or via some user interface. If you look at the attributes of a task, there are a couple interesting ones. The most interesting ones for now are the so-called candidate groups or candidate users and the so-called SNE. So what happens in the task management, which is pretty common in task management, is that we separate a group task list from your personal task list. That means, for example, normally I would assign a user task to a group like human resources. And this group has a couple of members, like 10 people in human resources. All of them see that task in their group task list, or you might want to call it team box or whatever. So all of them see that. And then at a specific point in time, if you want to do that, what we do is we so-called claim the task. And that means we assign it to somebody of that group who wants to do it. And then it's basically placed on its personal task list. That's there to avoid that two people of the same group working on the same task at the same time. So if two people of the human resources want to start claim them, and the one who claims first wins. The other one gets an error message basically saying, okay, you cannot claim the task, somebody else is already working. We will see that in the task list, how that looks like in the user interface. So that's the claiming. There is another use case where you can use the SNE as well. If you look at the vacation request example, we want to maybe assign the approved vacation user task directly to the boss of the employee. Maybe not the one boss, the big boss, or the management, or it's maybe the team lead of that employee. And then what you can do, you can directly push that task, basically setting the SNE, directly push it to his personal task, not using any group task. Okay, so that's basically about candidates and SNEs and the claiming. That's basically all I wanted to do for basically settling the ground of task management. So now we want to switch to the Camunda BPM 7.2 task list. As I already mentioned, we shipped a completely new task list with the 7.2 release. So it's really a complete rewrite. So if you know the 7.1 task list, we basically tossed it away and wrote a completely new one. Why is that so? That's maybe interesting. With the former releases with 7.0, 7.1, the goal of the task list was basically to have something in the distribution to get started in demo or proof of concept environment. So the idea was that it can easily, basically using the engine, not only from an API perspective, which is maybe a bit boring for at least a couple of people, not for me maybe, but for most of the people it's a bit boring, but from a UI perspective, so you really have a task list and start working with it. But it was not really meant to be used in production, to be really used out of the box for real life environments. And that changed actually. We got a lot of feedback from customers. Hey, we basically want to use the task list, and a couple of them already did with the 7.1 release. But we need this feature and that feature. And at some point in time, we decided, okay, we redo the task list. We basically do that on a really good technology. We do it in a way that it's really usable in real life and out of the box. And that's why we basically rewritten it. While rewriting it, we improved the usability obviously a lot, and we improved the layout. We implemented a lot of new features actually, like filters. We will see that in a minute. But what we also did is we basically from existing core engine features, we try to have them in the UI everywhere. So with the 7.1 task list, a lot of the features we have in the core engine you cannot see on the task list. And that basically leads to a lot of people not knowing the features or not finding the features. So from now on, we try to basically expose every feature we have in the task list as well. So that's a completely different goal, and that's why we basically rewritten it. This is how it looks like. We will see it in a demo in a couple of minutes. We basically got inspired a bit by Microsoft Outlook. It's maybe a bit strange for an open source project to get inspired by Microsoft, but it's actually, we got a lot of good feedback for that basic approach. So we tried different approaches, and we got the best feedback from the approach, which basically means we have what we call filters on the, which are kind of groups of tasks where you can basically select one group, and then I see the list of tasks here in the middle. We don't have a flat table, but we have these cards view where you can have a couple of different information about the task on that card. We implemented a lot of tiny usability things like you can move through the different tasks if that is a list of tasks with the keyboard. So if you use the arrow down key, you basically can quickly go through the different tasks. And if you select one task, the details are shown on the right panel. So we have a couple of generic information about the task all the time. We have a form for that specific task. We will see that in much more detail later on. And we have a couple of things like history or the diagram. I will show you that live in a minute. Okay, so that's the basic frame of the task list. What we put a lot of effort in actually are the filters. So with the 7.2 release, we had a couple of fixed lists like my task or the group task or my colleague's task. That was everything. And now we changed that completely because we saw in reality, the task lists are used really differently. Like some of the smaller companies there can just see all tasks. In bigger companies, you normally just see the groups you're in, but some companies have requirements like, I want to see, as a team lead, I want to see the tasks of my team, not only my tasks, but all members of my team, or maybe I want to create a filter for a specific guy which is on vacation and I have to do his task for that time, and so on, so on, so on. So there are a lot of different requirements you have there. And so we basically built a generic filter capability. So in the user interface, you can click together your own filters. We have a lot of criteria. I will show you that in the demo, how it really looks like. But for that management filter, for example, I can say, hey, show me all tasks which have the candidate group management and which are not assigned to a person, basically which are not claimed yet. Okay. So by using these filters, I can have as much groups here as I want to have. The interesting thing about the filters, I have a slide on that later on. They are created server side. So the filter is really stored in our database. It gets an ID, and when the user interface want to show the task for that filter, it basically just has to send the ID of the filter to the server, and then it gets the right tasks already back. We have pagination working here, and this is, I have a slide on that later on as well. This is from a performance point of view, it's pretty good what we do there. So we can really tackle big use cases as well there. And maybe as a short side note, you can use the filters even from an API point of view. So you don't have to use the task list. You might want to have the filters for some other use case you implement somewhere in your backend. If you have these filters, the next requirement you normally have is that you don't want to have your normal clerk, for example, being able to access all tasks, right? So we added permissions to the filters. So when you create the filter, you can specify who can access the filter. So for example, all users, or you can specify specific groups or users. And in the authorization mechanism of the platform, you can basically specify who is allowed to create or edit filters. So what you can do is like an administrator or maybe some kind of setup script creates the filter for the people out there using the task list, and then they are not allowed to change the filters. This is how you can control at the moment that the end user only sees the task he's allowed to see. Okay. The next big thing, and this is what we want to tackle a lot in the demo, is the task forms. So obviously, when you want to work on a task, you need some data of the process to see or to change, right? Like the start date or who who goes on vacation and these kind of things. I want to set an approve button and these kind of things. So I need a form. We have different ways of creating a form that we will see. And what I always like to stress, that's very important for me at that point, we have a different form for the start of a process. So you can map a form to a start event. And that basically means if you start the process instance in the task list, if you click on the button Start, you will see that form. But at that point in time, no process instance is created yet. So if you decide not to start, but to close that dialog, there is no process instance somewhere in the database you have to clean up. So the form is shown before the process instance is started. You enter all the data, and when you click on Start, a new process instance is basically kicked off. If you then go to a user task, there you can define task forms as well, which basically means if you click on the task, you will see the form rendered in the right pane here. What you can do there, by the way, is you can maximize that. So if you need more space, and if you look at these two columns are really too space consuming, you can make a form here. Okay. For these forms, we have different kinds of forms. That's basically, we already had them with the old task list, like in 7.0, 7.1, but that changed slightly. So if we jump in the code in a couple of minutes, you might recognize that if you know the old mechanism. There's a migration guide available if that's interesting to you. So if you have to migrate embedded forms from 7.1, there's a migration guide. So there are basically three different types of forms. So the first one is what we call a generic task form, which basically means you haven't defined any form. That means there's a completely generic form rendered for you where you can just add variables or show all variables which are part of the process instance. You will see that in the demo. The next step would be a generated task form where you can say, I don't want to have this generic one where the people can do everything, but I don't care about the layout and I just want to have like 2 or 3 attributes being rendered. Then you can specify the attributes in the BPM file and get a so-called generated task form, which has basically a generic layout, but renders only the attributes you want to be rendered. And the next step would be you really provide a complete HTML form where you can, if you want to, you can even use JavaScript in there. So there are basically no limits in what you can do there. They're shown embedded in the task form. All these 3 forms I shown you are rendered embedded within our task list. Fourth possibility you have is you can use a completely different technology, like we have customers using PHP or JSF or Wicked or Vaadin or whatever, or maybe even your own HTML5 application. Then you can basically enter the URL of that, and we call the external form from our task list and handing over the task ID, so that task form can get all the variables, all the data it needs to render the form from our engine via, for example, the Java REST API. Then completing the task and basically redirecting back to our task. That works pretty good as well. Okay. I tried actually to make that as quick as possible to jump in the demo. Because I think that's the most important or most interesting part of the webinar. So what you have here is the process, no surprise here. And what I have is, in my case, I have a Camunda BPM 7.1, which is basically the enterprise edition, but you can use a 7.2.0 community edition as well. It's basically the same for what we do for today. I'm running a JBoss application server in the background, but that doesn't matter as well. So you could use a Tomcat or a Wildfly or a WebSphere or whatever you like. That actually doesn't matter. And currently I have an empty task list, which basically is the fact because I have an empty engine here, right? There is no process definition yet deployed. So we're ready to go. What I will do in the first place is I want to deploy that process. So I haven't configured anything for the task forms. What I do is I basically create a war out of it. So I basically create the war, deploy that on my JBoss, which basically picks it up, recognizes the BPM process, deploys it to the engine. So if I look at cockpit, now I will see, okay, there's my vacation request process, but I don't have any process instance running yet. Want to change that, so I can go to the task list. What I can do now is I want to start a new process. And again, as a hint, small tiny things that changed in the old task list, you had to hit reload in order to get the new process being shown. But now we query that live from the service. So I see the new vacation request. If that is a long list, like whatever 50, 60 processes, you can just do a live search here and type whatever you like and basically narrow down until you find the process you want to have. So I want to start the process. As I mentioned earlier, no special form configured. So I have that. It's now the generic form. I can just add variables. For example, I can say, okay, I want to have vacation. Maybe I provide a start date. If I have a date, I have to provide an ISO format for a date. So, for example, I want to have vacation from tomorrow on. Whatever I need to have a time. So that's valid. What you can already see is that it's validating that in the background, right? So that's what we use there, by the way, is AngularJS. So it's an HTML5 web application, basically consisting of AngularJS here, and maybe a duration map. Doesn't matter actually what I do now. So that's maybe long, and I want to go for today. I process, so that already works. I can see the variables I handed in. So that's actually not rocket science here. The task is now assigned to the management group. So I can see that here in management. Again, that's the filter we saw earlier. So that's management candidate group, unassigned, and all these kind of things. Yeah, maybe we don't. We look in the filters later on. So if I click on it again, I don't have a form provided. So first of all, I claim the variable. I claim the task, so I can work on it. At the moment, I cannot work on it, right? Because I haven't claimed it. So I have to do that first. Now I'm the owner of the task. So now I can work on it. Maybe again, a tiny little interesting detail. What you see, it vanished from the filter of the management group. Okay. That makes sense because it's now assigned to me and not unassigned. But we keep it open. So, we keep the task open even if it's now in that filter. So you don't have to change the filter in order to find the task again after you assigned it. Next small hint, you always have an URL encoding the whole state. So you can see that this references the task and the filter I'm in. So that's basically a URL I can even send by email or Skype or whatever to a colleague, in order that he can access the same task. Even the tab I selected is part of the URL. Yeah, we already saw something which is maybe interesting. We rendered the current state in the process. There we already use BPM and IO. I'm not sure if you use or know BPM and IO. That's open source project from us as well, doing a web-based modeler. And we're already using that for rendering and visualizing the current state. We have a history. So what you can already see is that in this task, I assigned that to me with the current time. If you, for example, now unassign it and maybe assign it again, you will see that in the history. If comments to it, whatever you want to have there, you will see that in the history as well. So this is all part of the UI now. Okay, I can see the variables I entered earlier, and I can again generically add new variables like approved, Boolean. Yes, I approve that one. So that's completed. If I go to cockpit, I see this moved on. Okay, not in here, book vacation on leave account. So now I can see the task in all tasks because this doesn't have any filter criteria. Or what I want to do, I quickly want to create filter for the human resources. Can give it another color if I like. I can give it a priority in order to sort that list here. But for the moment, you can see that we have a lot of criteria you can use here actually. So for the moment, I want to say it's the candidate group is human resources, and it's unassigned, right? One maybe interesting thing here is that what we very often have as a requirement in the task list is that you say, okay, I have a long list of tasks and I want to select the right one to work on. And therefore, I need more information already in the list, like the customer ID, the customer name, maybe the product ID, or the tenant or whatever. So that's why you can add variables which are shown on the card for all the tasks. So I say the name variable, please show that on the card, and it would be like employee's name. Okay, so that's what's shown there. So I have this new filter. If I click on that, I see my task, and this is what I meant. I see that additional variable here already in the list. Okay, I have a slide on that later on as well. Important here is that we fetch this variable with the one request we do, the one REST request we do in the background to fetch the whole task list. So we don't have like one REST request to get the task and then one REST request per task to catch all the variables, all these kind of things. We only have one request to get all the data we need, which is basically very important for performance reasons. Okay, so this is that. I think that's already pretty good at the moment. Yeah. Maybe if we already talked about filters, it's a good timing to quickly talk about. There's a due date, so that's basically should not be missed, or a follow-up date. If I say, okay, this task, yeah, I can work on it, but not before tomorrow because whatever, I'm missing information. So then you set a follow-up date to tomorrow. And what you then can easily do is you can filter on the dates as well. So for example, I say I want to have additional criteria on the dates. So I say, it's always a bit twisting with dates actually, but I say the follow-up date is either not existent. So if I don't set any follow-up date, I want to see the task. But if I set one, it should be before now, right? Because otherwise it's in the future and then I don't want to see a follow-up. Okay, so I add that to the filter. See that task anymore. If I go again to that task and maybe set follow-up date to yesterday, and then I will see it there. Okay. The same you can do with the due date, so it's easier to like create a filter. Say I have overdue task, right? And maybe not even by the specific process because that's for the for some manager who wants to see all overdue tasks. Yeah, it's basically the same what I did. Now it's going to the dates. It's basically the due date is before now, right? So don't have any tasks in there at the moment. What we try to do is basically try to make it as intuitive as possible without creating a super complex UI. Okay, so it's still maybe a bit techy, but it's pretty straightforward actually. And you always get hints there, and you have additional hints in the documentation. So that should be actually pretty easy to do. Sorry. So no overdue tasks here. Okay. Next thing we want to do is if you look at the generic task, that is nice to get started. So for rapid prototyping, that's really cool actually. You can just draw the diagram, maybe together with a business analyst or even an end user, and then immediately click through it. Maybe you have to provide 2 or 3 variables in order to get it right, and you can already run through the whole process, which is really cool, in order to make it more transparent how processes works, right? And if that process is really what you intended to have. But it's nothing or normally used in real life. So the next step, what you can do, maybe still for rapid prototyping, but sometimes even for real use cases for if you have easy processes like vacation request, it might be sufficient that you just specify a couple of attributes which should be shown in the user interface. So for, again, maybe the name could be a string, right? And maybe a start date, starting on, that would be a date. You can have like a validator there as well if you need it, like a required or these kind of things. And the duration, how long? That's basically long. So that's it. I want to have the same thing here. That's maybe a quick hint from real life. If you want to copy these 3 form fields to that one, the best is actually to go in the XML, because you can directly get these stuff from the XML. I mean, it's not rocket science to grab them here. Go to the approved vacation user task, edit there, save it, and reopen that one, and then it's there, right? And I add an approved Boolean, right? So that should be it. I redeploy the whole thing, right? So if I start the vacation request, now what I get is a generically rendered form, but with the attributes I specified. Okay, so now I already have some kind of frame, which is pretty cool. So that's pretty quick to get started. So I can say that I want to have vacation. This time I get a date picker because we know it's a date. So we render a date picker. I want to have maybe from Monday on for 4 days. Would be nice actually, but we have more webinars next week coming up. So this will not get approved actually. But I founded that company, so maybe, yeah, whatever. So I started, again, we go on the vacation request. We now got a new version, I think, because it's part of the BPM file. We got a new version, and we had the process instance waiting there. Oh, sorry, in the history view. With the variable set. Okay, if I go to the management task to approve vacation, the same stuff here, now the form gets rendered. Okay, again, I have to claim it in order to work on it, and this time I don't approve it, and I complete it. Okay, nothing very surprising here. Now I took this path and the process instance is ended. Okay, these are the generated forms. The next step is actually if you say, okay, this is somehow nice, but a bit limited. I want to have more sophisticated forms. I want to have more control over the rendering. You can use HTML forms. And what we do there is we really use simple HTML forms. There's no magic, no Camunda specific stuff in there. It's basically an HTML form. We use Bootstrap for as CSS library for the layout. So there you can check how these things are working here. And we use AngularJS, as I mentioned that earlier, as JavaScript framework, which provides a couple of really nice features, like, for example, to make this input field required. This is handled by AngularJS. Now I have to fill in some data, otherwise I can't submit the form. You could use regular expressions, for example, for email checking or other stuff. That's really pretty straightforward to do. And the only thing we add basically to have some own directive in AngularJS. So you can bind this input field to a process variable with that name. So that basically means when you submit the form, this input field, the value of entered in that input field is stored in a process variable called name, and the value of that input field here is stored in start date. And if the format or the type of the data should be different from the default in the HTML tag, you can specify that here. So then the basically transforming it is done out of the box in the background. Okay. We often have the discussion, oh, okay, this is somehow nice, but this is HTML, this is coding, I need a programmer for that. I'm actually not convinced that this is the case, because that's actually really easy. So we have a couple of customers having a small wiki page, providing these snippets as copy and paste template, for example, and then it's really easy for everybody to create forms. So it's not really programming skills what you need here. But the reason we have this mechanism is that you're basically free to do whatever you like in that form. I show you a more sophisticated example in 2 minutes, where I use really JavaScript and more AngularJS. So you're not limited to what we invented or what we thought you might need and baked into some kind of form builder. But you're really flexible and using whatever you need there. That's basically the reason why we don't have these form builder mechanisms. But what we already did, and that's maybe an interesting hint, if you search for Bootstrap form builder, there's a component out there which is open source as well, which we already use in projects, which is actually pretty cool. What it does, it provides a small form builder as an HTML page, so I can place a couple of things I need here. Sorry, maybe this one is nice. So I can really drag and drop my form. For every element, you can specify keys. And then what it basically does at the end, it renders the HTML source code. And this is exactly what we need in order to provide an embedded form. And the easiest thing you can do is to leverage this as it is, and then manually add the Camunda specific extensions in the HTML. Or if you want to do it more sophisticated, it's also possible to extend the properties here that you have, like the 2 Camunda properties you need, and then you can very easily build your own form builder if that is what you search for. It's not yet decided, but I guess we will do something similar in the product sooner or later. But at the moment, we don't have a form builder. But in the real life project, that's not a big deal actually. That's the smallest bit, or it was never a problem. Let's say it this way. If I have the HTML form, I can attach that to my BPM process. So we have a so-called form key, which is string, where I can provide the form. So what I say is I want to have an embedded form. It should be loaded from the application, which basically means the form should be loaded from the deployment from the process application. And then I have to provide the path within the web application. So I can say, okay, go to forms. Sorry. Go to forms. And then use the start forms simple HTML. So this is that. And I use the same stuff for the approve application. There I have the task form approve. Oh no, I do that in the next step actually. Wait a second. that again. I get a new version. I start a new process. Yeah, and again, I get the form. It actually looks more or less the same. You see the naming is a bit different. The date picker has vanished because I haven't used the date picker on my HTML page. Maybe a good hint to point you to the documentation. In our user guide, so docs.camunda.org, we have the user guide. There we have a chapter on the task forms where you can get all the information I tell you here as well. And for the embedded task forms, there's an own reference. You find the reference here, references embedded task forms, and there you can see what kind of controls you can use there. And there, for example, you have for date inputs, you have an example how to use the date picker. Okay, so the documentation is there. It's actually not a big deal to do. So again, I can start a process. Okay, I need a valid date again. So whatever, and I can start that task. Okay, and this works because I just set the process variables like before. Okay, so you can really combine the mechanisms as well. Next step, which is really interesting, that was a very simple form actually. Before using that form, I still can use a generated form, right? But what you can do is you can really make that more sophisticated. For example, what I did is I wrote a start form. Let me make one remark more before we go to that. What we still have in our process is we have all the variables as process variables. What you might want to have if you have real life processes is like you want to have an object, like a Java object or an XML file or JSON representation of your object. So the vacation request might be a real object. Like I have a vacation request with a couple of attributes. And then I don't want to have the attributes as plain process variables. So it doesn't make sense, right? If I have the object, I want to use it. And this changed a lot in the 7.2 release. We have a separate webinar on that next week. But in short, we can now easily serialize Java objects as JSON or XML in the database, and can easily transform between the different formats. So in that case, for example, the user interface can create a JSON object. So it basically creates the vacation request as JSON file, send it to the process instance, to the server backend, and then it's transformed into a Java object. And in order to do that, I can basically hook that in the start form as an example. What you can do is you can provide your own scripts. You could even use your own JavaScript libraries if you like. That's basically, you can see that in action in one of our examples as well. That's a good hint here for everybody. So on our GitHub account, there's an example repository. There you find a lot of examples for different features of the Camunda BPM platform. There's one for the object stuff as well. So what I do here is I create a vacation request variable in basically a JavaScript variable. I assign that to the scope. That's, if you know AngularJS, this should be pretty common to you. If not, don't matter at the moment. But that basically means I bind it to the scope of Angular. And then I say, okay, as soon as the form is loaded, that's a callback we provide. I want to create a variable in the what we call the variable manager. That's part of the Camunda form SDK we have in JavaScript. And there I create the variable, which is called vacation request. That will result in a process variable, vacation request, which is of type object. As we don't have a Java object here because we're in JavaScript and we have JSON, we have to provide the class name. If you create the object in Java, that you don't need that, but from JavaScript we need that. I basically set the value to the object I created. and I tell the engine to serialize that object not as byte array, what would be the default, but as JSON in the database. And then we have a date picker. Don't want to go into that one. And now what I can do is can work on the vacation request on our scope with the Angular data binding. So now I can work on the vacation request name and the vacation request start date and the vacation request duration. Okay. And basically the same thing I do in the task form where I approve. When my form is loaded, I fetch the variable vacation request. When this is fetched, I bind it to the scope, and then I can use it in the Angular data binding. Okay, that's more for the JavaScript guys. But it's actually pretty cool, and it's pretty powerful. What we already did in project as customers, really having sophisticated UIs embedded in our task list, because there's basically no limit what you can do there. You can use JavaScript. You can basically do a search dialog to search for customers or these kind of things. So there's no limit to simple HTML forms. If I use that one, let's do that quickly to show that this works. So I now use that start form, and I use that one, which is called task form proof. So if I deploy that, I started. Again, the form doesn't look very different, actually. Again, I want to have vacation today's. I started. Again, I get a proof vacation. This is always good. If we get an error, we can see that it's live. I already see it, right? It's task form without a minus. So that's obviously a typo. Yeah, right. And the chat already saw it as well. Thank you for for the hint. That's always good to get the feedback that the people are still with me. Yeah, and then let's start another one to see that this is working. Yeah, the form again looks pretty similar, but the technology is pretty different, and we can see that actually in Cockpit. Maybe that's interesting. So if I look at the newest version, then I have this one process instance running here. If I look at the variable, now I have only one variable, which is called vacation request, which is a Java variable. So if you are in a Java delegate, for example, you say get variable, you will get a vacation request object, a real object, but it's serialized as JSON in the database, and this makes it possible to inspect it via Cockpit or change it via Cockpit as well. I will go into much more details about all these kind of things here next week in the webinar. Okay, that should be it. Let me think if I maybe one last thing, not to forget it. Yeah, I showed you that. I can maximize that. That's actually pretty important if you have big forms. These are the tiny issues which were really important to a couple of our customers. But what we can do as well, that's not interesting. We can search for tasks. So for example, if I search for a task which has the process variable name, burned, then I only see these tasks. And again, the interesting thing here, this goes to the server. So it's a server-side search. Pretty performant, and it works with the pagination. So by default we display 15 tasks on a page, and this still works even if you search. So it's not some kind of strange client-side filtering. By the way, you get the hint here, so it's basically really part of the URL. Okay, that should be it for the demo for the moment. I actually saw a couple of questions passing by. I will answer them in the Q&A in the end, okay, because that's easier to make that in one go. So let me quickly add a couple of information about the task list, which might be interesting. The first thing I already mentioned, the task list is not in any way tied to BPMN. 90% of our use cases still create tasks via BPMN processes, but it also works for CMMN, so the case management model and notation. Introduced in 7.2 as well. There's a webinar on that on Friday if you're interested. CMMN also knows human tasks, and if I create a human task there, it basically ends up in the same task list, obviously. And you can create tasks in an ad hoc manner. Actually, in the 7.2 release, there's not yet a button or some possibility in the user interface to create an ad hoc task, but this will follow pretty soon. It's not yet decided if this will be in 7.3, but I guess it will be there pretty soon. And then it can really use it for ad hoc tasks, just to create and delegate them. So all of them go in the same task management, can be used in the task list. We saw the forms SDK. So that makes it actually much easier to write forms in HTML. You saw that it's really easy. So you don't have, so this form would already work, right? It doesn't do a lot of layouting, but it works. And this is really easy to write, right? And we did that by using these directive there. And you saw that the variable manager. So there are a couple of things to make your life easier if you want to write HTML forms, because from our point of view, that's a really good use case. If you don't write your own UI, which still a lot of people do, which is completely valid use case. But if it's not that, if you don't have these specific requirements and want to use our task list, it's really convenient to use the forms now on, and we try to make it as easy as possible. But we are always thinking in the developer-friendly way, how we call it. So it's not what I mentioned earlier. It's not a form builder which limits you. It's basically giving you the power to make it easy, but still having a whole AngularJS and JavaScript under the hood. Yeah, I mentioned that one. If you're building your own HTML5 web application, or not using our task list, you're building your own web application, there's even a whole SDK for JavaScript. So that basically, kind of a wrapper around the REST API to make your life, again, a bit easier, to make it faster, to get going. You might want to use that even in server-side JavaScript, like Node.js. So we have an example on that. I don't know a customer really doing that at the moment, but let's see, maybe time will tell. But at the moment, it's already convenient for HTML5 applications. So you can say, I want to have a client for this REST API. I want to work on the process definition resource, get me a list of process definitions, and basically these are the attributes you can set in the filter of the REST resource of the process definition. Sorry. That's pretty straightforward, actually. Okay, maybe. And we talked a lot about HTML5 now. For me, it's always important to make the hint. We have a pretty good integration in CDI, so in Java EE, and this can be leveraged very good in JSF. So if you build JSF user forms, which are external forms from task list, it's still possible in 7.2, and it's still really easy. So you have basically a mechanism to bind the current CDI scope to a task, and then it can easily bind process variables to JSF elements. Okay, so that still works out of the box. So it's basically up to you. You're free to decide what fits best in your environment and your development team. what we used ourselves in the task list as a technology stack, I already mentioned that, it's HTML5. It's basically JAX-RS, the Java standard for REST in the backend. That means on different containers, we use different implementations. So if we are on a full application server, we use the implementation provided by the application server. On Tomcat, we ship, I think, REST Easy. So that's the backend. And on the front end, it's basically obviously HTML. We use a lot of AngularJS, which is actually pretty good, works pretty good for us. We use Bootstrap for layouting. We use a bit of jQuery. We use Require.js. We use our own SDK, obviously. Yeah, basically these are the most important frameworks we use there. And because I'm always asked, how do you do HTML5 development? What are your experiences? I basically listed the tools we use for development. So maybe you know them, maybe not. Grunt is for basically for building, a bit like Maven, let's say it that way. There are a couple of other things for testing, for example, for package management, like dependency management, these kind of things. The important thing is, if you want to go HTML5, I think it's a pretty good thing nowadays to at least have a look at it. You get better user interfaces. Especially if you have these single page applications like we have here, then it's really cool what you can do there, but it's a completely different technology stack. So you should not basically take let's say a normal Java developer, maybe familiar with JSF, and or that will not work. There's really a learning curve involved, and we actually hired a couple of people which are really HTML5 gurus. One of them is not really speaking Java at all. That works pretty well. So that's kind of a different mindset and know-how you need there. But the important thing is that's basically true for the frame, build the whole application. If you just want to build the forms, then it's actually pretty easy. There we make good experiences because you saw that, right? You can start with very easy stuff, and then you maybe use a couple of BigQuery or JavaScript things. These you can easily Google your way step by step. So that works. But if you want to go HTML5 in your complete application, that's kind of a learning curve. Okay, the task list, we developed that actually together with customers. So we didn't want to go to the ivory tower, develop for a couple of months and ship something and see that doesn't work. So we worked together with a couple of customers, and we already got really good feedback. So it seems to be a really awesome release, and I'm pretty sure it is, but it's always improved if the customers say that. And I basically make me a slide to not forget anything very important, what we did there, because we really did cool stuff, and it's too much for a small demo. But I think I tackled most of them. So you saw you can search for tasks server side. That works pretty cool. You can navigate through the task via the keyboard. Small feature, but really important. You can maximize task form. You can add comments. A very important thing, actually. You can change the color scheme. So, okay, you can change the whole CSS file if you like, but then you really have to dive deeper into it. But you can very easy change the color scheme. So if you say it shouldn't be red, it should be blue or green because that's my company color. It's really easy to do. Just provide a small config file, and the same goes for the logo. If you don't have that Camunda Tasklist, important. Yeah, small but very interesting feature. Not sure, maybe you know the UI mediator pattern. We already blogged about that a couple of times. The idea is the following. If you're in a BPM process and you do this process, this user task, for example, and you finish it, and in the same process instance, maybe there's a user task immediately created for you again. Yeah, maybe this user task is assigned to the boss again. Then it doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of usability that the user has to go back to the task list, search the task, click on it in order to continue in the process. Because very often you want to, if you have the next task immediately available, you want to do it because you're already in the context of that task. And if that happens, we give a small hint here, a small box where it says, okay, there's a new task in the same process created for you. You might want to jump to that directly, and then you just click on that link and you're there. So these are small, tiny bits there. And very important from my point of view, we built the task list with a plugin or pluggability in mind. You might know Cockpit or the Cockpit plugins. So what we have in Cockpit are plugins, which we list there. So you can have your own tab in Cockpit, or maybe have something on the dashboard, some charts or whatever, like a heat map, which is pretty nice, or these kind of things. So you can provide plugin in order to change the behavior of the application. We built the task list in a way that other internally. We haven't yet finished the plugin mechanism so that you can provide your own plugins. We currently plan that for the 7.3. It might already be available with the Alpha 1, which is, I think, next week maybe already. So that's pretty close, actually. And then you can really extend the task list, like, for example, adding your own app or maybe changing that card or these kind of things, which gets really cool. We talked about the task filters. They are server-side. So what you can do if you have a task query, we have an old filter service introduced in 7.2. You can create a new filter, set the query on that filter, and then save that filter. And later on, you can just say, okay, I want to execute that filter, and please give me the first 20 rows, and that's it. Okay, and you can use that from an API point of view as well. We're currently using that only in the task list for tasks, but it's not tied to task queries. So we're planning to use that in maybe Cockpit for instance queries later on. Or you might want to leverage that if you have requirements like you want to do a bulk, bulk complete of 20 tasks according to a filter, these kind of things. Okay, so these are task filters. And the one thing I mentioned earlier, and that's important for me because we always have a look on performance. If we say we want to do a real life task list, we have, by the way, a performance webinar next week as well. So you might want to join that. There we have more information on task lists too. But one thing I wanted to mention here already. So if we do this request to get the task with a filter, what we get back is a so-called HAL, so a result, which basically is a single JSON. So we just do one request, get one JSON back, and that's enough to render the whole task list. And if you want to, you can cache some of the relations there, like users or process definitions or these kind of things. You might even want to cache like tasks. But as always, if you turn on caches, you have to be aware of what lifetime of the cache should I have? Is it a big problem if I have stale data and these kind of things? So they are not turned off by default, but it's easily possible to turn them on. And these JSON requests, I made an example there, and there you can see what I mean. So that's basically a big JSON, and there in the JSON, some of the objects we need in order to render the task list are directly embedded, like the SNE, for example, or the process definition. And at some part of that structure, we basically do not embed, but we set a link, for example, to the deployment. This is not embedded, but we set a link. For the task, we set a link to the SNE, but don't get all the SNE data like the picture or the email or whatever. We don't get all the present definition data. But we embed, for example, the variables which are requested for that filter. It's basically a different example, so that's not that nice. It would be the name in our example. Okay, just to give you an idea what we do there. Very important topic for customers, maybe not in the US, but for other countries, is the task list is a tool for the end user. For the end user, it's much more important to have a localized version. For a cockpit, it's not that important. Like an administrator normally can work with an English tool, but end users want to have a translation. In order to tackle that, what we did is we built the task list in a way that it's built in, but we provide all the language tags basically as community extension. So there's a GitHub repository where you can find translations already. You can still provide your own translation if you want to, either only for your project or you can share them. So just send a pull request, so we might add them here. There's no guarantee, and for community extension, there's no guarantee that we maintain the language file over long term. Okay, that's the different thing. So English is in the product, the rest is a community extension. As we are a German company with a lot of German employees, actually, it's pretty likely that we always maintain the German file, but it's less unlikely without community help to maintain the Russian or Ukrainian language file. But and then if you have the language file, it's pretty easy to plug that into the Camunda task list. It's basically described as a user guide. Don't want to do that now because we're running out of time. But it's actually a matter of half a minute to do that. Last remark I wanted to make in the webinar, then we go to the Q&A, because we always get the questions, okay, that's nice, but if you assign a task to somebody, I want to send an email, or what happens if I assign a task to somebody who is on vacation and these kind of things. And the thing is that we haven't built that in the task list as feature, but it's always easy to add that to your processes. And we have a lot of examples in the web how to do these things around task management. For example, if you want to send an email to the user who is assigned to a task, what you can do is you can add a so-called task listener to your user task in the BPM process model. We have the code in our examples repository, so you can see that, and you can always have a look at how that really works. Okay, there's a listener, and there you can see, okay, what does it do? It gets the task, it checks the SNE, if the SNE is set, it basically queries the user from the identity. There we get the email address and send an email, in this case via Apache Commons email. It doesn't have to be Commons email, right? So this is an example, it's a template. You can copy that and adjust that to your needs. And it's also possible to use so-called parse listener to add that listener to every user task you have in your whole engine. So you don't have to model that explicitly in every BPM process model if you want to have that always. Okay. It's just one example. There are other examples. We have one live where how to handle absent SNE. So if you want to assign that to a specific person who is on leave, how can you then decide who is basically doing the job? We have other examples like 4S principle, some escalation mechanism, setting a due date by an extension configuration, and these kind of things. Okay, just to give you some pointers and some hints. That's actually easy to hook in, and that's always the philosophy we have in Camunda BPM, to make it easy to hook in additional functionality. Yeah, that's what I mentioned earlier. So what we tried to do is really to make it real life usable. So we talked to a couple of customers, and the DAB bank in Germany was one of them, where we worked really close together with basically showing all the alphas, discussing these kind of things. And they basically made a good summary, which basically makes sense, where they say, okay, that matches the DAB Bank's web technology stack. Okay, that makes us lucky. And it saves extensive in-house development. The functionality is optimally aligned. It's still flexible, adaptive. So I think that's a good summary what happened there. Okay, so I hope that fits your requirements as well. And this is a good point in the webinar where I want to do a quick poll actually. Wait a second. Because for me it's really interesting, or for us, basically, if you really plan to use that task list, or if you just wanted to see what we were doing, or if you're already using that, so would be really cool if you provide some answers to the poll. In the meanwhile, I can just add that I hope that the task list fits your requirements as well. If not, the best thing is always talk to us. Wait a second. I still wait. There we get votes on the poll, so I'm still waiting for a couple of seconds. Because we have things in mind for the roadmap. So we want to enhance authorizations. We want to have the plugin mechanism. I explained that. We want to have tasks not related to any process or case, so you really can create that in an ad hoc manner. But it's always subject to change as long as we haven't committed on a concrete roadmap. So for us, that's an interesting phase at the moment where we gather experience in the project and basically collect feedback. So if you have any feedback, let us know. Either the forum, you can always send us stuff via the forum. There's a link which might be interesting for you if you have any questions, or if you wanna do something with it, let us know. We're always interested in what you're doing with the platform, what you're planning with the platform. So let us know. That helps us actually to shape the product better for the future. If you wanna play around with what I showed today, you can either download the community edition on Camunda.org, or if you go to Camunda.com, you can get a trial version of the Enterprise Edition. The Enterprise Edition, I don't want to go into that details now. You have it on the homepage. Ask us if you have any questions about the differences. It's basically that we have a couple of features additionally, that we have patch releases, so we have a stabilized version like the 7.2.1. And we have the support and SLA and these kind of things, right? Okay. If you have any questions, you can always call us. And that's basically from my side. So, we run a bit out of time, but we still have like 10 to 15 minutes for the Q&A. I saw a couple of questions coming by, and I tried to answer them one by one. If you're missing something, just post the thing again in the chat. So the first question is, if you have the user, or I just reread the question. In our application, the user needs to upload a file as part of the task. What would you recommend? So there are two answers to that. The first thing is, it's not completely easy, to be honest. But the first thing is you can use embedded task forms. So if you have the embedded forms, you can think of a JavaScript mechanism in order to do that. It's actually not that easy because you cannot easily use that as form variable. You could maybe do that, but I would not recommend it. So it might be some mechanism where you upload the file in the background asynchronously or something like that. That would be one thing I could envision. Or if you don't have the embedded forms, if you have external forms, then it depends on the technology you use. Like in JSF, you can use upload stuff, or in other technologies as well. You cannot have that in the generic or generated forms. Another question was, can the process flow status can be retrieved via the REST API? So that basically refers to that image, I guess. So what you can do is you can get the status from the API. You can get the BPMN2 XML via the API. And then you can use basically what BPMN.io is doing. It's a small JavaScript library where you can hand over the BPMN XML. And you can basically hand over these, how they called, basically that you mark some user tasks by the ID of the element in BPMN. And then BPMN.io does the rest. So that's really straightforward to do. Just maybe to give you a quick impression. So BPMN.io is the renderer. So yeah, whatever. Actually not what I wanted to show, but it can render BPMN files and it can highlight anything on there. It just needs an XML. And we use that, for example, for diffing. And we don't have anything. Too bad. I have to select files in order to diff. Too bad. Yeah, that takes too long. But so yeah, you get everything you need via the API easily. So you can build that yourself in your own application. There was a question. What is involved in customizing the user interfaces? Actually, I'm not completely sure which user interfaces are asked for here. If you refer to the forms, it basically means you're in our frame. We are using Bootstrap. So I'm not sure if you know Bootstrap. Getbootstrap.com, where you have a lot of things like whatever tables or some form stuff or buttons or whatever. So this you can use in the forms. And if you want to have the whole task list changed, that basically means the easiest thing, what I mentioned earlier, is that you can change the color scheme. So if you go to the task list, customizing, there's the logo, header, and color, and there you can have a user style. That's basically what's easy doable out of the box. It only works for task list. Cockpit cannot that easily be branded. What you still can do, you can exchange the whole CSS file yourself. It's a bit of more work, but then you're not limited to anything. Then you can redo basically everything. There's a question, maybe I need some help there. Is it possible to have a fully dynamic variable without a backing bean? Just plain JSON. You mean that the process variable is a JSON and I don't have any Java object, right? Wait a second, yeah. Was the question? It's sure, it's possible. I mean that for the engine, then it's at the moment it's a string. There's no specific stuff there. It's a string. We're currently discussing if we add own data types for XML and JSON. That we say, okay, this is in JSON, and then we can, for example, directly apply JSON part of these kind of things without having to convert a string to JSON and vice versa. But at the moment, then you have to handle it as a string. That might change actually in SEM 3 or SEM 4. Not yet decided at the moment. So we have another question. Is it possible to use LDAP for authentication? That's an interesting question as well. Maybe I quickly show you something there. What we use for authorization or for user and groups is basically something we call identity service, which is a small module with an interface, which you can exchange. So the default implementation just points to our database where we have user and group. That's for demo environments really handy, but normally not used in production. Normally you will exchange that identity service either with LDAP. We have LDAP out of the box, LDAP support, or you can implement your own thing if you, for example, have your own user management implemented in some whatever Java component and you want to access that. That's possible as well. But it's always from LDAP you only get user and groups and the authentication, so the password basically. That's now handled in LDAP if I change that. We also keep the authorization, so which group has which permission on which resource, like the applications or the filters. This data we keep in our database. Okay, so we can have user groups and passwords from LDAP, and you have to make any authorization in database. There's one last question, and I think then we wrap it up. There was an additional question on authentication. It's possible to authenticate from OAuth. It's possible, yeah, but it's not completely out of the box. So it's not that easy as it maybe could be or maybe should be in future. But it's possible. There's no example actually available for that. So you might have to dig a bit into it or then ask in the forum again. Okay. Is it possible to create a sub-process and have it in the BPMN tool? Okay, this question I didn't get completely. Is it possible to create a sub-process and have it in your BPMN tool diagram similar to drag and drop used for event or a task? So you basically mean that I have like, do you mean a call activity? So I want to drag in some sub-process, reusable sub-process I call here, or do you mean these BPMN sub-processes where I have additional? Well, okay, that was big. Not sure what the question is exactly completely about. Okay, the question is if in the modeler here, if I can see the list of processes to select from. Is that a question, right? So I have to basically type in, yeah, okay, perfect. I have to type in the process name here, and there's no select box. And it's true, there is no select box. The reason for that is basically that we're currently here, we're in development mode, so we're working in a Maven project. That the sub-process might be part of a different Maven project, of a different deployment. It must be there during runtime in the runtime engine, but we don't know if it's there in the development environment. So that's why we don't provide a drop-down list here, because we basically don't know which processes to fill in there. And we could have some Eclipse magic to scan all processes, search all BPMN files, and basically list them there. But it would be still a guess. It might be wrong. Or we could access the process engine via REST in the background, but that might be wrong as well because the process might not yet be deployed. And that's the reason why we don't have that. Yeah. It will not be there in the next version. Okay, thank you guys very much. Letter actually, yeah, I have another version, but we're actually out of time. The best thing is to put that in the forum. If there are any questions, I make a quick last poll. If you like the webinar, I would like feedback on that. Thank you guys for listening. For me, it was a great pleasure. I hope that was interesting. I hope it was nice to listen to. I hope my English was not too bad for you. If you have any questions, let us know. You have the contact data. Yeah, go to the Camunda.com page. Give us feedback what you do with it. If you have any questions, go to the forums, download it, and yeah, have fun with it. Thank you and have a nice evening. Bye bye.